It takes about half a second. One hand, one finger, no words at all. And everyone who sees it, anywhere on Earth, understands it instantly. No translation required. Most people assume it is modern, something that came out of traffic jams and rock concerts and rude television. It is not. This gesture is roughly 2,400 years old. It was already being used and already understood as filthy when Athens was building temples. It is older than the Colosseum, older than nearly every country on the map today, older than every language you have ever heard spoken. Empires that used it are gone. The alphabets they wrote in have changed. And the gesture has not changed at all. Not the hand, not the meaning. Not once in 24 centuries. And the record of it is far stranger than you would expect. It includes a famous philosopher who used it on the most powerful speaker in Athens, a Roman emperor who forced his own officers to kiss it, a legend about a medieval battle that millions of people repeat and that is entirely false, a baseball pitcher who smuggled it into a photograph in 1886 and got away with it for almost 100 years, a crew of captured sailors who used it as a secret code for a year and paid a terrible price when it was discovered, and a court of law in living memory that had to rule on whether it counts as free speech. But it does not start in a courtroom or a stadium. It starts in an open-air theater in Athens, almost 2,500 years ago, with a comedian making a joke that his audience understood immediately. Athens, 423 BC. Thousands of people sit on stone benches in the sunshine, watching a new comedy called The Clouds by a playwright named Aristophanes. In one scene, a rough, uneducated old farmer named Strepsiades is being taught about poetry and rhythm. His teacher asks him about a unit of verse called a dactyl. Now, the Greek word for that unit also means finger. So the old farmer, who understands nothing about poetry, gives the only answer he has. He holds up his middle finger. The audience roared. And the fact that they roared is the important part. The joke only works if every single person on those benches already knew exactly what that hand meant, and knew it was crude. Which means the gesture was not new in 423 BC. It was already old enough to be a punchline. So what did it actually mean? The Greeks were not being subtle. Held up alone, with the other fingers folded down, the hand was read as a crude little picture of the male body. The fingers standing in for one part, the folded knuckles for another. That is the whole origin. It is not a coded symbol or a secret sign. It is a small, portable obscenity that you can carry in your hand and deploy in half a second, and that is exactly why it worked. Think about what a useful weapon that is. You do not need to be strong. You do not need to be close enough to touch. You do not even need to share a language with the person you are insulting. You just need one hand and 1 second. A tool that good does not stay in the theater. And the next man in this story used it on the most famous public speaker in Athens. His name was Diogenes, and he is one of the strangest figures in the history of philosophy. Diogenes belonged to a school called the Cynics, and he built his entire life around a single idea, that almost everything people chase, money, status, reputation, comfort, is worthless nonsense. He did not just teach this, he lived it, aggressively. By the accounts that survive, he owned nothing, slept in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace, and made a career out of publicly humiliating important people. And in Athens, few people were more important than Demosthenes. He was the greatest orator of the age, the man whose speeches could turn a crowd, the voice of the city. According to the story, when Demosthenes was mentioned in front of him, Diogenes simply raised his middle finger and announced that there goes the great leader of the people, the most respected voice in Athens, dismissed by one hand and one sentence. That anecdote comes down to us through a much later biographer, writing some 600 years after the fact, so it should be held loosely. But it tells us something real regardless, because of what it takes for granted. The writer expects his readers to know the gesture on sight and to grasp the insult instantly, with no explanation offered. Centuries after the theater in Athens, the meaning had not drifted at all. And this is where the gesture reveals what it is actually for. Diogenes was not stronger than Demosthenes. He was not richer, and he held no office. What he had was a way to strike at a powerful man that cost nothing and could not be answered. You cannot really argue with a hand. That is the point of it. Then the gesture crossed the sea to Rome, and in Rome it got a formal name, and a much darker use. The Romans, being Romans, gave it an official name and put it in the literature. They called it the digitus imputicus, the shameless finger. That name shows up in Roman poetry and satire again and again, used exactly the way we would use it now. For contempt, for mockery, for telling someone in one motion that you do not respect them. A gesture that had been a punchline in a Greek theater was now a standard part of Roman life. But the most disturbing use of it belongs to one man, the Emperor Caligula. Roman biographers, writing about his reign in the 1st century, describe a habit of his. When men were brought before him to pay their respects, custom said they would kiss the emperor's hand or his ring. Caligula, they wrote, would instead hold out his hand, shaped and moved in a deliberately obscene way, and make them kiss that. Historians who study gestures read this as the shameless finger offered to be kissed. Consider what is happening there. This is not a rude sign flashed from a distance to insult a stranger. This is a ruler forcing another man, up close, to press his lips to an insult and pretend it is an honor. It is degradation dressed up as a ceremony, and it was a message about who held all the power in the room. One of the officers reportedly subjected to this was an experienced soldier who took the humiliation personally. He later became part of the conspiracy that assassinated Caligula in the year 41. So by the end of the Roman era, this gesture had done everything. It had made a theater laugh, humbled a statesman, and helped push an emperor toward his own murder. And then, for a very long stretch of history, it goes quiet. Here is the odd part. After Rome, the gesture largely drops out of the written record for centuries, not because people stopped being rude to each other, but because the sort of rudeness ordinary people used all day was rarely the sort of thing anyone bothered to write down. Monks copying manuscripts were not documenting what one farmer did to another across a field. So there is a gap. And into that gap, people have poured one of the most confidently repeated false stories in popular history. You have almost certainly heard it. The story goes that at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, the French planned to cut off the draw fingers of captured English archers so they could never use a longbow again. And when the English won, they supposedly waved their intact fingers at the defeated French as a taunt. And that, people say, is where the rude gesture comes from. It is a wonderful story. It is also completely false. There is no contemporary evidence for it, nothing from the time of the battle, and nothing for centuries afterward. Historians and the British Library have looked, and there is no established link between Agincourt and the gesture at all. In fact, the whole explanation does not appear anywhere in the record until roughly the 1970s. A story about a battle in 1415 was invented, essentially in living memory, and then spread by photocopied jokes and forwarded emails until it hardened into something everyone knows. There is a second problem. The Agincourt story is usually told about the British two-fingered V sign, which is a different gesture from the middle finger. The myth is so popular that people have quietly stapled it onto both, and we can prove it is false with a simple date. The middle finger was documented in Athens almost 1800 years before anyone drew a bow at Agincourt, so the gesture did not need inventing in 1415. It was already ancient. It was simply waiting for a technology that could catch it in the act. Boston, opening day, 1886. A baseball team called the Beaneaters lines up for its official team photograph. If you're enjoying watching one hand gesture outlive entire empires, subscribe. There is a new story like this every week. Photography at this point is slow and serious. You hold still, you keep a straight face, and the picture takes what feels like forever, which is precisely what makes what happens next so good. One of the players is a pitcher named Charles Radbourne, known to everyone as Old Hoss. He was one of the best pitchers alive and, by every account, a famously difficult man. As the photographer sets up, Radbourne rests one hand casually on the shoulder of a teammate sitting in front of him. Then he raises his other hand, extends his middle finger, and holds it there, rock steady, face completely blank, for the entire exposure. It worked perfectly. The picture was developed, printed, and distributed with the gesture sitting right there in plain sight, and it seems nobody in charge noticed for a very long time. It is widely credited as the first known photograph of the middle finger in history. And Old Hoss was not finished. The following year, he did it again, on a cigarette card printed for the public. More than a century later, one copy of that card sold at auction for around $9,600. Think about what had just changed. For 23 centuries, this gesture had been a thing that happened and then vanished, remembered only if a writer chose to describe it. Now it could be captured, printed, and copied. The camera gave the oldest insult in the West, something it had never had before: permanence. 80 years later, that permanence would matter more than anyone could have guessed. Because a group of American prisoners was about to use this gesture as a code in front of cameras held by men who wanted to destroy them. On the 23rd of January, 1968, North Korean forces seized an American Navy intelligence ship called the USS Pueblo. One crewman was killed. The survivors, more than 80 men, were taken ashore and held prisoner for 11 months. Their captors wanted propaganda, so the crew were repeatedly posed for photographs and film, arranged to look comfortable and well-treated, as proof to the world that they were being cared for and had confessed to spying. The men found a way to fight back inside those photographs. In picture after picture, one or more of them would casually extend a middle finger toward the camera. When their captors eventually asked what it meant, the Americans told them it was a Hawaiian good luck sign. The explanation was accepted. And so, for months, North Korea published photograph after photograph of its prisoners, distributed around the world, with the crew quietly signaling their contempt in every frame. It was the only weapon they had left, and it was working. It ended in October 1968. Time magazine, reporting on the images, explained plainly what the gesture in the photographs actually meant: a sign of obscene contempt. Word reached the captors. What followed, the crew later called Hell Week. The men were beaten severely and systematically for days. The propaganda photographs stopped. The crew were finally released in December 1968, after 11 months. The ship itself was never returned, and remains in Pyongyang to this day. It is worth sitting with what that gesture was doing in those photographs. These were men with no weapons, no freedom, and no way to speak to the outside world. And they used a 2,000-year-old hand signal to tell anyone who might one day see the picture that they had not surrendered on the inside. Diogenes used it because he had no power. So did they. By the late 20th century, the gesture had become so ordinary that societies had to decide, formally, what to do about it. And that meant courts. In 2006, in a small town in New York State, a man named John Swartz was riding as a passenger in a car when he spotted a police officer running a speed trap. Annoyed, he made the gesture. The car was pulled over, and Swartz was arrested and charged with disorderly conduct. The charge was later dropped, and he sued. The case worked its way up to a federal appeals court, which ruled in 2013. The judges called it, in the written decision, the ancient gesture of insult, which is a remarkable thing to find in a modern legal document. And they held that making it does not, on its own, give police reason to stop anyone. It might be rude. It is not evidence of a crime. So a gesture first recorded in a Greek comedy in 423 BC ended up defined in American case law as protected expression. Then came the final step. In 2014, the Unicode Consortium, the small international body that decides which symbols exist on the world's keyboards and phones, approved it as an official character. It was given a formal, wonderfully bloodless name: reversed hand with middle finger extended. It was assigned a code number. Some technology companies were reluctant to display it at all. Think about how strange that is. A gesture that once got a Roman officer humiliated in front of his emperor and got captured sailors beaten in a prison camp now sits quietly in a drop-down menu between a waving hand and a thumbs up. Approved by committee. Available in 6 skin tones. And that is where 24 centuries of insult arrive. Not banned, not forgotten, but standardized. Cataloged, numbered, and installed on billions of devices, ready at the tap of a thumb. So the real question is not who first raised that finger. Somebody, somewhere, was always going to. The real question is why this one gesture survived when almost nothing else did. The language spoken in that Athenian theater changed beyond recognition. The empire that named it collapsed. Its gods abandoned. Its cities buried. This survived, unchanged, and reached every country on earth. Part of the answer is that it is simply a perfect tool. It needs no words, so no language barrier can stop it. It needs no equipment, so nobody can confiscate it. It costs nothing, works instantly, and carries across a street, a battlefield, or a photograph. Every person alive is born already holding one. But the deeper answer is about power. Look at who keeps using it in this story. A philosopher with no money, aiming at a statesman. A prisoner of war with nothing left, aiming at his captors. A passenger in a car, aiming at the police. It is the weapon of the person who cannot win the argument, cannot win the fight, and refuses to pretend otherwise. That is why an emperor turning it around and forcing men to kiss it feels so wrong. He took the tool of the powerless and used it as a whip. It was there when a comedian made a theater of Athenians laugh. It was there when a captured crew smuggled their defiance past their guards, one photograph at a time. And it is there tonight, on a phone in someone's pocket, with an official code number. Somewhere right now, a driver is making it at a windscreen and thinking nothing of it. Somewhere, a photograph is being taken that somebody will regret. And somewhere, in a museum case, a 2,000-year-old piece of Roman writing still describes it by name, in a language nobody speaks anymore. We have invented cities, religions, alphabets, and empires, and watched most of them fall. The oldest surviving gesture in the Western world is not a handshake, or a blessing, or a salute. It is an insult, and we have never needed to improve it. If this is your kind of story, subscribe. A new one lands every week. And tell me in the comments, which part surprised you most? The philosopher? The emperor? The battle story that turned out to be false? Or the sailors who got away with it for a year?